Hi, welcome back to Future Past. And once again, we have Balagopal Chandrasekhar with us. And for those of you who are here for the first time and have missed out on the first part of our conversation, I really urge you to go back and look up because what we're going to talk now has a lot of relevance and continuity from where we spoke in the first part, particularly his journey. So I really urge you to go catch up there and then come back. Then you will be able to connect because this conversation is going to be a continuation of where we had left off earlier. So please go back and come and join us once again here. And for the rest of you, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I'm sure you will enjoy it a lot more in this conversation. And once again, if you have not yet subscribed to Future First, do it right now. Well, Bala, thank you once again for making time and being with us here. And and also thank you for extending your time because we really had a used up the last conversation for the time slot you had, and I think it was fantastic. And one question I wanted to uh, catch up from that part to bring it here is that you've continued with your journey in particularly in the as a board member in a lot of organizations, and which is very natural because you obviously played that role in your company from a journey of startup to the build up. But what I want to understand is how do you pick which board should you be part of? Is there a rule that you have put for yourself as okay, this is what is okay for me and this is what I will go with?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nanju. I actually learned a bit from experience. Again, like some trial and some errors, and then I realized that I need to be careful about some things. See, I think the main point here is that the role we are talking about here is that of independent director. So I am now, registered with the Department of Company Affairs as a qualified independent director, and I have been an independent director. Now, I think even in my mind, I did not foresee the kind of problems which company managements and promoters have about what precisely is the role of an independent director. Just to give you an example, in the case of one company in the private sector, which I was invited on board as a independent director, because I think the reason was that the external investor into that company wanted independent directors, and that company till then did not have independent directors. So the promoter of that was introduced to me through some mutual acquaintance, and he came and invited me to join the board of that company, and I joined. At the first meeting itself, I realized that he thought independent director is just like one more director of on the company. Since I did not represent anybody, I would be, quite okay with. And it was a well-managed company, very scrupulously well-managed. The promoters were honest. Everything was fine, except for the fact that, for instance, I asked in the first meeting itself a few questions about the exact role of the promoters' nominee directors, who included people like his sister-in-law and his brother-in-law and people like that. So he looked a little astonished at me, and then during a bio break, he told me, he said, "Sir, these are all, they all represent the family." I said, "Yes, that's fine. But the problem here is that they're drawing substantial salary. And I, as independent director, I have to question all these things." So he really didn't. Then I told him, I said, "I don't think you really understood the role of the independent director. I'm not there just to, what shall I say, bring in some expertise around. I am there.
Many times contributing to the echo chamber that they
So
create.
I told him, I'm not there just to help you to run the company better. I'm there also as a watchdog. On behalf of the unrepresented stakeholders of your company. So which means even the public, the government, the others are. So I have to ask questions. If you're going to pay a substantial remuneration to one of the executive directors, then I must know how many times he or she attends office, where is the organogram, what is the connection, how many people report to her or him, and etc. So he was quite nonplussed, and he said, actually, nothing of the sort happened. They just get this check, So I said, then I'm sorry. Then it's going to become a little difficult for us, because I will have to place all these on record, and you have to give your answers to those things. So I think what I'm trying to get at is many companies where an independent director is now mandated to be present on the board, they really don't understand. And I also feel many people who accept independent director assignments do not fully appreciate the statutory and fiduciary responsibilities they are supposed to carry out in their capacity as independent directors. And so this leads to dissatisfaction on both sides. That is from the management of the organization as well as from the regulator, because the regulator will feel this guy is just coming, drawing sitting fees and doing nothing, because the minutes do not reflect the thing. So I found this problem. So now what I will do for future, and as a result, I've exited a few boards because I did not want the relationship between me and the people who invited me onto those boards to be spoiled. Because I told them that will happen because they have not understood the role of the independent director. So now I think going forward, I am extremely reluctant to accept positions. I found the assignment with Federal Bank very fulfilling, because that as a large and publicly managed, well-managed, publicly held institution was a good experience for me, because I also was able to expand and broaden my understanding of the role of an independent director, because I was able to learn by observing the other independent directors on the board and their conduct. But that's an exceptional kind of situation. And I am, for instance, I know that I will not accept another position on another board, because I feel it will not be correct. Since for 8 years I was a member of one bank board, I won't probably accept another bank board appointment, because I will be bringing a lot of inside knowledge about the functioning of one bank to the operations of another bank, which is not correct. So this is a commitment I made to myself only, that I will not join the board of another bank. But I will also be very careful. What I think I will just end with this answer to your question, that if I get any serious invitation, I have got several invitations which I have not accepted to join the board. Because I have told them that I think you guys may regret inviting me onto the board. So it's better that we remain friends and I don't come onto your board. But if I do accept such a thing, I think I will want to satisfy myself about the quality of the management, the quality of the promoters, and the track record of the company before I go on to the board of such of any other public limited company.
Right. That note, doesn't it sound like where schools do a check on their students if they qualify to get into the school, in that sense, as in your role is also to ensure that they learn and follow, right? I mean, if they're all good, then probably they don't need someone like you.
Yeah, no, but here there is a problem, Nanju, is that, see, these are a board of a company is a statutory body, and the board minutes are statutory permanent records which have to be available to regulators. And if I, for instance, go on to the board of a company, and of course, I should have done my homework and ensured that I don't get onto the wrong kind of company. See, you can't set right a management which does not intend to do the right thing. It's not possible for an independent director to set it right. It will just lead to dissenting notes being consistently recorded in the minutes. And finally, this will lead to a confrontation between the independent director and the rest of the board, and which will make board functioning very difficult for that organization. The statutory regulatory authority may eventually want to step in, because if they have access to the board minutes and other proceedings, and if they see this kind of thing happening, they will want to step in, and then they will want to. The whole thing can become very unpleasant. So if you also, even if you want to bring change, the change can happen only with the willing collaboration and cooperation of the management of the organization. So if an organization, say by mistake, meaning without fully understanding the role of the independent director, invites you on the board, I think the best thing under the circumstances for that independent director to do would be to resign from that board, rather than try and set right things, because it will be a confrontation.
But sorry for stretching this.
Yeah.
See, if I guess more or less some people in the board of Satyam probably thought like this, and that's how eventually we had such a disaster, which in some sense retrospectively good, because a lot of laws came in place, even making independent directors function as compulsory.
See, Nanju, there's one big difference there. There, I would say, is that for a long time, the board was passing matters which probably it should have scrutinized more closely. So it was not as if the promoters and the owners of the company sprang a surprise on an unsuspecting board of directors.
Correct.
And that led to the problem. This thing was going on for years, and the board and many of the members of the boards and their subsequent replacements were all passing all those matters, probably after some discussion on cursory study of the of the agenda notes and the accounts and other things. But nevertheless, they had given the stamp of approval. So once it becomes part of the board minutes, then it's deemed to have been done with the knowledge and approval of the board. So the matter coming out, it came out not because of I think the alertness of the directors, but because I think of a whistleblower and something else.
Correct. So that was the problem. The independent directors didn't act.
Yeah.
In
here, Nanju, what I am specifically referring to here is again not a clear case of mala fide actions and intent to defraud the company, or I'm not talking about any very obviously bad things. But even if you leave those extreme actions aside, there are many actions which are not in accordance with the laws of the land, with the with the rules and regulations stipulated by the regulators, and with good corporate governance. So in such matters, even a well-intentioned well-intentioned management may need to be corrected and brought back to the right path. That is actually the main role which I'm thinking of the independent director. Because the independent director, precisely because of his or her independent status, as not being beholden to a shareholder group or to any other interest lobby, is in a position to point out things which the other promoter directors and other nominees may not be in a position to do. And here, not only should be able to, in my opinion, in fact, I'll become a little stronger on that and say the independent director is obliged to point out. If the independent directors remain silent during the passage of, say, one such proposal which gets approved without any comment from the independent director, it means the independent director has really, in that matter, not done his or her job. So what I'm talking about is actually the more nuanced kind of thing. It is not a black or white kind of issue of something legal or illegal, but it's something more nuanced where matters can be done which, say, for instance, are skating in a very thin line between very dangerously close to related party transactions, or something which requires a disclosure and or which there is a conflict of interest with some directors on the board and a particular resolution. They have an interest in that, in which case they should declare the interest, recuse themselves, and not participate in the discussion. So these are not niceties. These are very important parts of governance. And often it becomes the job of the independent director to point these out and see that the corrective action is taken at that instance itself.
Right. Well, I have some more leading questions. I mean, more towards your function as a chairman of the board. But I just want to step back to our previous conversation where we were talking about your factory and union.
Yeah.
I just wanted to conclude that before we continue here. So, how do you see the relevance of union today in today's times, where also compliance is also brought in many sense to companies, and even SME listing is also there today. So given all this scenario, how do you see the relevance of union?
See, I mean, I think one of the ways, rather than this can be answered at a micro enterprise level, or it can be answered at a macro and at an aggregate level. But at the aggregate level itself, it's very interesting. See, if you take the history of the United States, the business in the United States, people here in India tend to think there are no unions in the United States. What I would like to tell people, even today, what I would like to tell people is, you are all watching movies. At the end of the movies, you see the credits. How many of you have looked with any interest at the credits? Because it's going past so fast. I suggest you just freeze the screen and take a look at what those credits are. Those credits are as per an agreement with the trade union, with a very powerful motion picture trade union association, which has said that even the name of the chauffeurs of the cars which drive the stars has to be mentioned in the credit. And I feel sorry for that movie which fails, which forgets to do that, because they will be then blacklisted by the union and they will be in trouble after that. So my point is, people don't think that, they don't imagine that in what is considered to be the El Dorado of capitalism, the trade unions still play such a very powerful role.
Oh, well, incidentally, I think this year many Indians have realized that because of the Hollywood Writers Association union strike.
Yeah. So the other point which I want to make, Nanju, is that if you see the post-World War II, the next 20 years was the real boom of the US economy. That was a time when the US really, during the war, it became the global hegemon in industrial manufacturing. And for the next 20 years after that, it was the most powerful, undisputed economic hegemon in the world. Now, during that time, that is from 40s, 50s, and 60s, was the time when the trade union movement in the United States was at its peak. It was at its most powerful then. Good. So the golden age of American manufacturing coincides with the greatest power of the trade unions. There was no contradiction between the two. And third, very important sociological fact is that in most of the working class families in the United States, which I'm saying most of the families, say 75% of the families of the United States were single earner families, where only there was one earner. The woman used to stay at home and rear the children and look after I'm not making that a virtue, but I'm saying that was enabled because the compensation drawn by the one working member was enough for 2 cars in the garage, for a good standard of living, to finance the children's education through school and college and have something left over for saving. There was hardly any household debt at that time. Now comes the 1970s and there's a 80s, a transformation. The Ronald Reagan era comes, and then after that, the power of the trade unions was sought to be openly by public policy to be crushed and diminished.
Bala, I think another reason for the fall of union was also infiltration of the mob in the union those days, right? I think it was a combination of that.
No, that may have happened. That may have happened in some specific cases, especially one or two powerful automobile unions in Detroit and all that. But by and large, if you see, the main reason was, for instance, the Reagan crushing the air traffic controllers agitation. And he just fired all the striking air traffic controllers, which actually, in my opinion, was probably an unconstitutional act by the US president. But when you have the whole establishment, including the courts and all that, all of one mind, and treating, and that was just after the McCarthy era and all that, when the anti-communism was at its peak and everything. So anyway, that's another story. So my point was, trade union power did not stop American manufacturing from, in fact, in my opinion, enabled American manufacturing to be the most powerful, the strongest force in the world. And worker incomes were also high, enabling good standard of living. After that, everything changed. Today, we have a situation, I mean, till about a few years ago, a situation was trade unions had very little power. The unionization among the total workforce had fallen to an all-time low of 7% or 8% or something of workers only were members of recognized unions and all. Now, so at that time, then everybody should say, look what happened during that time. During that time, you had the offshoring of manufacturing. The managements and offshoring of manufacturing and the financialization of the US economy was happening. That means financial capital started becoming more powerful. Correct. Returns to financial capital as a share of total corporate profit started growing, and finance and Wall Street started dominating the US economy. So why did that happen? Because managements in companies were able to purely look at shareholder returns as their sole preoccupation and their sole responsibility. So in order to keep giving better rewards to shareholders, offshoring manufacturing seemed to be a great way of doing it, because you could go to lower cost manufacturing locations like Southeast Asia and China and all that. And nobody looked at the workers in the US who were losing their jobs. So offshoring led to loss of jobs, profits for the shareholders. So one stakeholder was taken care of, but the other stakeholders were not even recognized.
Well, markets actually gave people, I mean, it was very immediate. If they cut down headcount, their share price goes up.
Exactly. So precisely. So the share buyback, this whole concept of even huge cash surpluses which were incurred by companies, the managements, unhampered by any pushback from any other section, could use those cash reserves for share buyback instead of building new factories, instead of building modern factories, instead of building up their manufacturing capability. They just gave it back to the shareholders as through share buybacks and higher dividends around. Now, my point is, supposing we had a situation like in Germany, where by law, any company employing more than 500 people has to have labor representatives on the board of the company. This is by law in Germany. If supposing, I'm just saying hypothetically, if there was such a law in the United States, do you think that such decisions to offshore manufacturing to China and use cash surpluses to pay rich dividends and help shareholders by share buyback, etc., would not have been allowed to pass without opposition? So, So my point is, in the US today, there is a backlash. Now you can see that trade unions are beginning to raise their head again. They're getting more membership. They're getting more active. They're becoming more activist. So the first test case was that one of the Amazon warehouses where Amazon succeeded in crushing any attempt to form a trade union through putting all kinds of obstacles. But finally, a local court intervened and the union was allowed, and they immediately went on a strike because of the very anti-worker policies which were being followed by the management of that particular warehouse, which employed a couple of thousand workers. And there is now a very strong feeling that this is going to spread across the United States. And because of this, casualization of workers. See, what has happened in America is a transformation of workers from permanent worker status to temporary and casual worker status. And now they found a new term for it. Americans can always find new gig economy. So they found a new term for it and they call it gig economy, which means everybody becomes like the person working in a McDonald's or in behind a shop counter. You don't have any rights, you don't have any benefits, you don't have any social security protection of any kind, and your wages and all that are anyway not very impressive. The official figures are that worker incomes have real incomes of the working class in America has stagnated for the last 50 years. It's an astounding figure to imagine that for the last 50 years. So what has happened is this cohort of the US population has seen that for the first time in American history, one generation is seeing the next generation not enjoying the same standard of life as they enjoyed when they were young. So I gave this example only to say that you need trade unions as a check on managements, and that's why I went on an aggregate plane rather than bring it down to a micro enterprise level story, because this is not a story about a relationship between an individual. This is a broad economy-wide societal problem, a societal phenomenon, and trade unions are, in my opinion, one of the checks and balances which civil society has to prevent the diminution of democracy in the life of ordinary people. So if we want some kind of democracy to happen in our lives, that is not just once in 4 years or 5 years go and cast a ballot, but if we want to see more, if we want to have more say in what happens in our lives, then we must have a say in the workplace where we spend 1/3 of our lives. And the only way to have a say in the workplace is through having an active and responsible trade union movement.
Well, one aspect was very curious. The example you chose to talk about Amazon. Amazon is one of the companies who actually increased the minimum wage. And in fact, they were the first to do so. And they are the first even to recommend the government to increase and consistently and proactively, and even challenge many of their competition to raise it, and even invite that, see, if you can even increase it more than us, it's still good, but at least increase it. And few people even followed it. And Walmart didn't do. And ironically, the protests happened here and not there. I mean, there it has been happening in pockets, but not to the extent which grabbed the headlines. So how do you see this? I mean, this was something very interesting that when somebody actually is more proactive.
That is interesting now that you pointed out. And in fact, Walmart as an almost worker unfriendly employer has been known for a long time. But at that time, I suspect what probably helped Walmart was, as on the one hand, jobs were being lost because manufacturing facilities were being shut down and transferred to lower cost places in Asia. The only other jobs which were really available in sufficiently large numbers were those offered by organizations like Walmart and primarily led by Walmart. So I don't think either civil society nor local governments in the states and in the towns and in the counties and all, they did not want to antagonize. They were all trying to attract a Walmart to their place because at least some jobs were being provided, and not one or two. See, the thing about shutting down of a factory meant 500 jobs gone, 1,000 jobs gone. Now, what else is there in a city which can employ 500 people and 1,000 people? It is only large establishments like Walmart and now Amazon, because there's nobody else. A restaurant will employ 3 people, or a small corner store will employ 5 people. But these large numbers can be employed only by this. So that's why I think governments people and civil society were very cautious about criticizing Walmart earlier. But now situation has come to such a pass that even, for instance, whatever the revised minimum wage which is being suggested there, when you compare it to the purchasing power of the dollar and how prices of essentials, everybody is playing with numbers these days. I find that most of the rebuttals about inflation and the Biden administration statements regarding inflation are citing a particular set of figures to show that inflation is around 4% in the US. But I have seen podcasts where they are watching the prices of essential commodities in the supermarkets and in the food shelves and all the shelves. And those have been rising at 15 and 25% for the last 1 or 2 years. So the point is, there is this real mismatch in the basket of products which are considered to determine either consumer price inflation or wholesale price inflation in the United States. And there's a lot of dispute and furious dispute going on in the US about those numbers and the validity of those numbers.
Right. Another thing in the same context is that Europeans and Western world, right, what we also refer to as developed nations, much of them have near 70% of their economy jobs coming from MSMEs. So that is possibly another reason where I feel that union play was little reduced, because only 30% of the jobs come from large enterprises where unions can actually have a stronger say, and majority is 70%, which is so that is perhaps another reason why I thought the union power dwindled. But at the same time, in an India context, we still have less than 50% MSME jobs. So there are 2 parts to this question. So one part is, how do you see this necessary for MSMEs to get stronger from a point of becoming a developed nation, if you will, or equal in that sense? And 2, in such a scenario, how do you still see the relevance of union? Because that would weaken the MSMEs, right? You need little more entrepreneurial play to scale and grow as an MSME. How do you?
This is where Nanju, where I differ. In sense, meaning where my thinking is at least is slightly contrarian thinking. My experience is that it is a mistaken belief that a strong trade union in an MSME becomes a hindrance to the growth of the MSME. If you ask me my story, my statement will be that my growth and health and strength as a MSME growing to, now my company has a turnover of say 500 crores. It employs 1,500 people in the factory. That was enabled and made possible by the fact that there was in partnership a very responsible and strong trade union movement in the company. Now, this is not only a question of an individual perception and value based, a value system, but it's also a very important difference between me. I find myself in a minority, even in Kerala here, among the employers and among the business owners and all. Most of the people really think that not only is a trade union not necessary, but a trade union is actually a hindrance because it prevents people from growing and taking the right, achieving whatever they want to achieve. Now, when I look at it, my experience in large organizations, on the boards of large organizations, my experience in advising smaller organizations which have 100 people, 200 people, and have about 100 crore turnover, etc., is the decisions taken by one person are never as good as the decision taken by a few people together. If that one person, unless, and that is an extremely rare case of one person being consistently right in all the decisions he or she is able to take without consulting anybody, and because they own the organization, and another organization where that one person may own the organization or have management control of the organization, but he or she nevertheless takes decisions in consultation with various groups within the organization, etc., has a regular formalized consultative process by which decisions are taken, and finally he or she even takes everything to the board and follows a process before taking a decision. My opinion, it is this process-based decision-making which always yields better results. The other thing is a mythological kind of a notion we have of a strong, Ayn Rand-like this this kind of what I would call romanticized figure of this strong guy looking out with the set jaw, looking out over the saturnine smile on his face, and he takes, very odd, looks like what you call seat of the pants, all decisions just like that, they happen, and they all turn out to be brilliant decisions, which are...
No, but that is the business world, right? Driven by that individualism.
No, it should not be, because
in
my opinion, even if you take a well-managed restaurant or if you take a well-managed...
No, but that is consistently shown successful entities created, right? Like Steve Jobs from Apple, or even Elon Musk, for all those things that he's doing.
That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of these kind of examples, because I think they are all the wrong examples. I don't think we should emulate Elon Musk, because all of us are not Elon Musk. It is just like saying, say Richard Feynman when he was solving a physics problem. But there's only one Richard Feynman in the whole United States of America. So in 200 million Americans, there was one Richard Feynman. That's not an example on the basis of which we can generalize advice to others. Elon Musk is an exceptional entrepreneur. He is exceptional precisely because of the very counterintuitive kind of things which he takes, and the great risk-taking ability which he has, which is the single thing which I would say which separates him from everybody else, is he is willing to bet his shirt on what looked like extremely long odds, but he will go and bet his shirt on it, whether it is the e-vehicles and or whether it is SpaceX. So the point. So again, coming back to the normal, general kind of entrepreneur, the MSMEs, etc., I'm talking about them. For them, I think what if they put in place, that's why in many MSMEs, Nanju, I have found when they have come to me with a business problem, it will be a 100 headcount IT company with about 50 crore turnover and good export business, and they have some problem. And I'm not an IT expert, I tell them that, but still they come to me. So I listen to them, I sit in on their board meeting. They give me all the records, I go through it. Then I finally tell them, your problem is not a business problem, in the sense that it is not an operational problem, it is not a management problem, it is a governance problem. And I said, your problem is you promoters, you are 3 or 4 of you promoters, you have not been able to align each of you are pulling in a different direction. And therefore, as a result, this organization, despite the talent of your people and the hard work of your people, you are producing suboptimal results, not because of anything wrong with them. You guys are constantly changing the goalposts, and hence they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So I said the problem is inside the room, and it's a governance room. It's a governance problem. So in the same way, I think, Nanju, you will be surprised if you just go and sit in on even if it is a family-run concern, if there's a small private limited company with 50 crore turnover, and you go and sit in on their decision, whether you call it a board meeting or management committee or whatever it is, there is some point at which the managing director will sit down with 2-3 friends and take decision. And you watch what happens there. You will realize the problem is there. That is, the guys are talented. They know their work. If it's a mechanical engineering shop, they know the mechanical engineering part of it very well, everything. And I know many enterprises in Coimbatore and all that, which are not doing well, not because there's no business, not because their technology has got a problem or anything, or that they're not spending enough on marketing and business acquisition. It is just that they are not made clear. It's not clear to the people working in the organization, what are they supposed to do? What do these people want? Are they looking for growth in this sector? Are they looking for growth in this sector? Are they, how important is quality to them? There are all kinds of confusing messages coming down from the top. So I feel good governance and a culture of compliance with statutory regulations. Actually, in my opinion, Nanju, statutory regulations have been put in place to create a reasonable framework within which to have a well-managed entity. If you follow most of the statutes, by and large, you can say you are operating in a reasonably sensible, reasonably law-abiding way. Now, we have created a culture over a long time that compliance is for fools. Compliance is for the slow-witted and all that. But the smart, daring, highly capable man like me, why do I need to comply? I can find 100 shortcuts and this and that. They don't realize they're wasting their time, and which is very scarce, and their energy and their ideas on all the wrong things. If they just, had a culture of compliance, then they would find they don't have to think about it, because everybody knows this is the policy of this company, that we'll follow the rules, we'll follow the statutes. We don't want any shortcuts. We don't want to go and meet somebody in their home and hand over a small, bag with some cash in it and all that. But we will stick to the rules and do that. Not just in the long run, even in the medium term, that pays off. So I feel, for example, if we all become like the German MSMEs, in German MSMEs, that's their heart. Like you mentioned about the US, their real heart of German industry and everything is what they call their Mittelstand companies. These Mittelstand companies are often small family-run organizations with very few, say they'll be having 10, 20 employees, but they'll be in a niche and they'll be working very well. But what is very interesting is they are, as far as statutory compliance and compliance with the local town rules and local county rules, they're 100% compliant. That's a value system. It's not because of course it's enforced, because the authorities will come and check. But that's not why they do it. They do it because that's the way they are. That's what makes them German. That's what defines them as go by the rules. We follow the rules. And all their innovation, everything happens somewhere else. So I just want to sum up by saying, I would make a proposition that if we are able to bring about a culture of compliance and honorable business dealings, for example, the second thing in India, the problem is, it is considered to be something very clever if you delay payment of your supplier's bill. So if he is supposed to get payment by the end of the month, and if you drag it on for one more month, people think that, I've got one more month, I'm using somebody's float, I'm using it as a float, and I got some extra cash in the bank. So that is true as long as you think the other party is a fool. But once you recognize the other party is capable of thinking as well as you, what that other party will do is say, if I supply Balagopal's firm with something and the terms of trade agreed are 30 days credit, this guy is not going to pay me before 60 days. So what will I do the next time? The next time, the price which I quote will have one extra month's interest loaded on. That's all. So our cleverness will last only once. It cannot last the second time and the third time. On the other hand, Nanju, I was thinking, imagine the productivity. I'm just surmising this, but I'm sure somebody can really work it out. You're all trained in management. You can work it out. Imagine if the majority, not all, probability of all conforming is impossible. But Imagine if the majority of small business enterprises in the country agreed on a code of conduct among themselves, say among their local chamber of commerce or small industries associations. We agree that we will honor the payment terms of all our suppliers. We will pay on time. One. We agree that we will not violate any of the employment contracts and labor laws and whatever it is, which is not a great cost because you have to do it anyway. But if you adopt that as a value system, I would wager that productivity will go up, production will go up, costs will come down, and you will have a booming MSME sector if we do that. Just governance can do that.
True. Well, MSME has brought in many things like that, right? I mean, you need to pay within 45 days if you're a vendor. So, but I do know that there are companies who still don't get it within 45 days because they have an internal understanding.
Yeah.
So that's but so coming back to banking, how did you transition from an independent director to the chairman of the board? Is pretty much going to the other side of the table.
See, in the banks, those banks which are the scheduled banks, the role of independent directors is very big role and a very expanded role in most of the banks. So the banks are very careful, try to exercise care to select good people as independent directors.
Usually, sorry. At this point, I was just curious. We had many banks being alleged that they gave away too much of loan without following the proper rules. The big cases, famous cases.
Yeah.
But even I think there was one of the managing directors was also pulled up for it. I think she is going through some cases, but not a single independent director of the board was pulled up for it. How is that possible?
No, actually, there are many independent directors who are in trouble in various institutions in the country right now and who are facing great difficulties for things which, in some cases, really cannot be laid at their door also. So let me just give an example. See, as a director of the board, you have liability in terms of you are responsible and accountable for the consequences coming out of decisions to which you were party and in which you have approved, and where in the record show that you have approved and not that you have dissented on. And later on, if it's proven that that decision led directly to the loss of a certain amount of money to the organization, etc., there is a accountability. Let me put it that way. Now, where the loss is due to criminal, allegation is made that this loss was due to criminal conspiracy or an intention to defraud the organization, then what happens is legal proceedings can be initiated against the management and officers responsible, as well as, and there is a likelihood that the directors who approved that decision, because the management will take shelter under the fact that they'll say this was a board decision. So then they will, the accountability and responsibility will be fixed on the board and they will be held responsible. So, for example, I know for a fact that, organizations like IL&FS, which is still, that thing is still going on. There's a massive fraud which was discovered, many subsidiary companies and all kinds of which have all kinds of very thin relationship to each other, and the flow of funds was very opaque, etc. Now, an independent director in one of those subsidiary companies who might be a person of impeccable credentials and who was brought in as an expert in a particular domain may have, with the information which was available to them at that time, say, been party to a decision which was approved, not approved, one particular resolution. They'll say approved. Now, that decision, when the IL&FS scandal hit the media and all, and investigative organizations, agencies came into the picture, they are not going to look at, they are only going to look at who are all the people who are suspects, who all are implicated, against whom should charges be raised. There will be a big list. Now, that list will actually have to be whittled down by investigation to really find out who are the people against whom the cases should be really charged. But that initial investigation will cover people who are only peripherally responsible. So when one says, yeah, but you approved the decision, that's right. But if you see the material which was placed before the board, sometimes it's very difficult to say, even with the benefit of hindsight, how on earth could any person have ever anticipated that this kind of thing would be, would lead to this particular consequence? So my point is, anecdotally, I have heard good people with impeccable standing and with their unimpeachable career records after retirement becoming an independent director on an NBFC or one of these finance companies, and then finding that they have to run in and out of being questioned for hours and being summoned to distant places for questioning by very junior officials under very what shall I say, psychologically very very high pressure situations around. It's all I'm saying is, all that it shows is that the accountability and responsibility of directors on boards is increasing. I have my own views on that, because I feel that that is a easy way for regulators to think they are solving a problem, but it is not solving a problem. All that is happening is there is so much regulatory load, supervisory and oversight load which is placed on boards, that boards will be able to do only this oversight role. They will not be able to do the governance role in terms of setting the direction for the organization. The board is not a watchdog alone. It is supposed to be like the pilot. It is supposed to be giving the idea, saying, let's go in this direction or let's go in that direction, and lay down broad policies.
So that is getting lost, you see.
That is getting lost sight of. In fact, in banking boards, already it is a criticism that the workload of the boards is so heavy that boards, even when they're meeting, say, 18 to 20 times a year, and the average duration of a board meeting is 3 to 4 hours, they are not able to do justice, because even these 18 to 20 meetings are not enough to really, if you have to discuss each agenda item properly, and you say that each agenda item should take 30 minutes to 45 minutes, each board meeting has 35 to 40 items on the agenda. So if you look at it, it is, we can very readily see that just piling on the responsibility might be making the regulators feel they are doing their job. But I think that's not the solution. We have to find some other solution. So the upshot of what I'm saying is this, the regulatory role, the governance role is so important. In fact, the return on investment by investing a little more in governance is going to be highest in MSMEs, in my opinion, rather than in the large organizations, because this governance role is almost totally absent in MSMEs, whereas in the corporate sector it is there. At least in some companies,
it's mandated
because it's mandated, even if sometimes they're only going through the motions, but it's being done. But in the small proprietary organizations and partnership concerns and MSMEs, it's hardly there. They just have a board only name which never meets. Minutes are written up by their chartered accountant or by the auditor, and everybody signs, and that's how it's done. If only they took their governance role seriously, the organization will benefit. That's my point.
So when you moved as a chairman, you changed the hat from the ensuring the compliance. As an independent director, you probably...
No, not really.
Okay.
So here is what is very interesting is, on the board, the chairman of the board is again a governance function. It's not a management function, because it's a non-executive chairman. Clearly it's mentioned. It's a non-executive chairman. the management responsibility and accountability is that of the managing director and CEO, assisted by the executive directors and a senior management team. So as chairman of the board, my responsibility and accountability was to ensure that sufficient time and attention is devoted to governance issues, to ensure complete compliance with all the statutory requirements and supervisory requirements. Our supervisor is the Reserve Bank. So the supervising organization being the Reserve Bank, in addition to Department of Company Affairs and the Company Law Board, we also have to comply with the mandates of the Reserve Bank of India. So from a governance perspective, is the board doing that? And is it devoting sufficient time and attention to that? That is my responsibility as chairman of the board. So my role as independent director, it continues almost undisturbed into that. What happens is some other responsibilities are layered onto the chairman. And that's why the chairman is expected to, even if it's a non-executive chairman, we are expected to devote more time. You generally are given an office in the, and these office facilities and some administrative support to carry out these additional functions.
So I also saw that you actually pretty much visited most of your locations across India. And was that a mandate, or was it something you took it upon yourself?
Yeah, it was not a mandate at all. In fact, I understand no chairman of any bank generally goes around visiting branches and all that. But what I did, what I knew was, see, in a diversified and growing organization like Federal Bank, which has 1,300 branches in many, many different locations from Eastern India to the Western tip and Northern, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. So there are many large parts and even, in fact, entire geographies which do not get a visit from the chairman or any member of the board. They never get to see them. And so why is that important? I felt it is important because, communication is carried on in various ways within an organization. It is carried on by, there will be in-house magazine, there will be some chat group, and there will be WhatsApp groups, and there will be so each organization evolves its own. But I still feel, for instance, the managing director of Federal Bank is a widely traveled guy. Despite him being so busy, he manages to find time to visit whichever town or city he goes to on work. He will take time out to visit at least a couple of branches. So what I did was I offered, saying, since I have more time on my hands, and my wife and I, we travel for our own reasons. We travel fairly widely. I said, if you are interested, I am prepared to set aside another day of my travel for visiting branches. And the managing director was delighted when I made this offer. So I've been to every zone in the country and many branches in every zone and every regional and cluster we've gone up to, right from Patna to Indore to Ujjain to Ahmedabad to all kinds of places I've been to. And what was interesting is the enthusiasm and the kind of the spontaneous and very natural warmth with which they were listening to me. When all I did was try to convey some of the key points about the company, about the bank, of the way we do business, and why asset quality is important. Growth is important, but it's also very important to see who do we give the loans to, and we must take the credit underwriting and all seriously. And I kept my message usually very short, but they really liked it. And then I'll give some positive reinforcement in terms of, some messaging like Rishta aapse, aap se nahi, aap se hai, that kind of thing, which was a very good advertisement.
So that's a very nice one,
which was a big hit. So those kind of things when I do, you're sort of showing the flag, kind of, but going and spending time with them. And also you're able to demonstrate by your behavior what are the values of the bank. So everywhere where I went, I mean, for me, it comes naturally because even as a young IAS officer, I did the same thing even in my company. So when I went there, before entering, I will stop, shake the hands of the security guard, ask him his name, where he is from, what are his children doing, and then I'll go in. And then later on, when I make a LinkedIn post about my visit to the branch, I'll mention the security guard. Now, those little things used to leave an impact on the others, not the security guard. The others used to say, we like being part of an organization where the chairman comes to visit and he finds time to, have a few words with the security guard. He doesn't treat him as just part of the furniture, that kind of, or the housekeeping staff there. Every branch will have a housekeeping lady who is employed on a casual basis. So I'll go there, I'll check the thing, I'll go and see the toilet, the pantry and all that, and then I'll compliment her. I'll call her, and supposing her name is Saudamini, I'll say, Saudamini, आपने बहुत अच्छा काम किया, ये बिल्कुल साफ साफ ये सब रखा है, और आपका वो जो किचन है, जो हमारे घर में जो हमारे माता जी रखते हैं, वो बिल्कुल वैसे आप ही रहते. So when you just say that and come away, those people, they will act like you've given them a 1,000 rupee bonus, with a smile on their face. And many of the young managers and executives wrote to me after that saying, we felt motivated watching you talk to the housekeeping lady. They used to feel, they said they felt motivated by it. So I used to use it just for that, for these kind of things. And in case there was any particular message, sometimes the CEO will tell me, Bala, it will be good if we need to convey this message because, there's a bit of slackening on that front. So can you also push this? So I'll say, sure, I'll go and, then I'll become business-like for that part of it, and I'll deal with it. So I think I was able to, if you ask the top management of Federal Bank, they will say that my visits were very good things. I'm not very sure, but that's what they think.
Well, how do you see the banking system, right? You started, from your administration point of view, you've seen the challenges the people at the bottom of the pyramid face, and then you yourself as an entrepreneur, and going through all the challenges of struggle and survive to the scale and grow to the exit. So at every point of time, you have interfaced with multiple banks.
Yeah.
So and also now sitting inside the bank and watching how the bank works. How do you see the whole thing? How contributing it has become to, one, to the business, and two, to the economy? And most importantly, I want to get, pick your mind in terms of where do you see scope for improvement here?
See, the banking sector, this may sound like a truism, but the banking sector is one of the most important parts of an economy. And I don't think that is much appreciated by people who are outside the banking system. So it is seen as probably some place where if you are a MSME, you need some loan, you need some bank credit for something, so you approach them. So there's a certain passive nature of bank credit.
Just curious, is this your feeling after you got into the banking system?
No, what?
As in that people outside the banking system don't appreciate banks.
I felt that when even before getting into the banking system itself, I felt that even as students of economics, many of us don't really understand the very core importance of money and finance and flow, this velocity of flow of this. How this is what money binds the whole economy together. It flows from it's because households buy products that firms manufacture things. So firms then, to manufacture those things, they need to, the simplest model, if you take a two entity model, you have households selling things and firms making things. Now, what households sell is labor. They sell labor and they sell other small things. Firms are buyers of those products, and they manufacture products which are in turn sold back to households. So this is a simple two sector kind of model. Then if you want to increase the complexity of this, you add a third sector, which is government. So you have households, industry, and government. And if the flow between these three entities is, now this flow, what happens is, while physically goods and services do flow, ultimately that is enabled by a flow of money or flow of credit which happens. So initially the money supply is printed by the government, and you print money and supply it into the economy. But then the banking system multiplies the money in circulation through creation of bank credit, because they create bank credit. They're not taking the money I deposited and giving it to you as a loan. They're creating money, because this is just a notional, it's just a book entry as far as the bank is concerned. So bank credit as the lubricant which enables this complex machinery to work is, I think we should, it needs to be understood in its proper relevance. But it's a little complicated, the subject. It is very complicated for various reasons. And one of which is, what is money and the value of money and all that. Now, if you take money purely as a value neutral entity, which just enables transactions to happen so that you don't have to carry physical goods everywhere, you can carry a wallet with a few paper notes, and that represents the purchasing power of this thing. So if you take that kind of view of money, and that it is value neutral in that sense, I think then what happens is we come up with all kinds of other, almost philosophical issues. Like, for example, say if I borrow money from somebody, I borrow it and I agree to repay it, and till I repay it, I pay a certain amount of interest accrues. Now that means I have incurred a debt, and you have a claim. If you are the one who lent me the money, you have a claim on me, and I have given you an IOU, and I have to pay the money which I borrowed from you plus interest. Now the problem is, very interesting economists like Michael Hudson and others are pointing out today, one of the problems with borrowing, I mean, this is if this argument, if taken to its logical limit, the banking will not be possible. But one of the problems of borrowing is interest works at compound rate of interest. So interest load works by compounding. Day and night, it is compounding. Whereas business does not work by compounding. Business works by, it's actually linear. It's a linear activity. It doesn't work by compounding. Yeah. So there is essentially a mismatch between the engine of business, which is using the money borrowed for its own productive purposes. The engine of business is hoping that the money borrowed will be used to generate a sufficient surplus which will take care of the interest and the principal when it comes to repayment. Now, if the repayment period gets very extended, what happens is the compounding machinery keeps working remorselessly, whereas the manufacturing or the business part of it does not work it does not work exponentially. It is working linear. So there is always a mismatch. So whether it is agriculture, whether it is industry, or whether it is trade, the return on trade and return on business and return on agriculture is always linear compared to the return on, the accruing interest, which is compounding, which is growing exponentially. It is growing since it is being compounded. So in the old days, according to Michael Hudson, and it's very fascinating, he says from the time of the Babylonians and, from those days of the old empires of the Abbasid and Babylonian and other those civilizations, every time a new king came to power, the first action was what is called forgiveness of debt. All debt is written off. But what is interesting is the debt which is written off is only the personal, individual, and household debt. Trade debts are not written off. So the king used to do that because he wants the people to be on his side. the people to have some benefit immediately as a result of him becoming a king. So the first proclamation was all loans forgiven.
Not very
all
different
debt
from the individual farmer loans being wiped
No,
out.
so actually, when you look at it, when you really look at it, one may say, we argue in terms of some Western notion of transactional kind of relationship and say, see, he took money, so he has to pay it back. The problem is he took money and you are levying a charge on the money. You're not asking for just the money back. You're asking for the money plus interest compounded. That's the problem. So if it's not only the fact that even if he has a good harvest, he will struggle to pay back the compounded amount, even if he had a good harvest. And if he did not have a great harvest and he had 2 successive bad harvests, it's almost impossible for him to pay it back, this amount. So it raises a very interesting question about, which is why when I'm just sort of segueing from this into a related thing of publicly owned banks and privately owned banks. I feel my personal view is that banks should be publicly owned, because I expect a private enterprise which is run purely for profit and returns to shareholders to forgive debt, to expect them to do that, then they will say, if we had known this right at the beginning, we won't come into this business. We'll do some other business. No? So in China, for instance, all the banks are, the banking sector is completely state-owned enterprises. So for them, it's a administrative decision. The Communist Party of China and the government of China will just instruct the banking system. They won't say write off the loan. They will say that's it. This much loan is not going to be paid back. You adjust your books accordingly. So they will go and they will have to adjust their books and absorb that hit, and whatever it is to be done, because it's anyway all state-funded banks. See, out of the 10 largest banks in the world, 7 are Chinese.
Well, that is true, but it's at the same time that would further trigger the situation like we are having, where people, the governments, the politicians who come into government will start doling out freebies, right?
Yeah.
And then put the load on the bank.
So my point is, see, if you today look at, and I'm telling you on the basis of today's figures itself, I don't think we can argue that private sector banks in India are better managed than public sector banks. Though you may be astonished to hear that, because you'll think HDFC Bank is there, ICICI Bank is there, Kotak Bank is there, etc. Now, if you just look at the total aggregate NPAs on the books of the public sector banks, almost 90% of those happened after the huge infrastructure lending which happened during the second Manmohan Singh time. That I don't think there was anything wrong in the giving of the loans. What happened was policies changed after that. The coal blocks, the auctioning of the coal blocks. There were several super thermal power plants which were set up with funding mostly from state-owned banks. Now, those power plants were to get their coal allocation. They were supposed to get coal from public collieries on a preferential basis. That whole policy changed, and they were told, now you have to go and source your own coal. So what were seen to be reasonably sure prospects, prospect of getting the repayment, suddenly became iffy through no change in the coal plant technology or anything, no change in the banking policies, just that the coal mine allocation policy changed, and because of some change and some dispute, they were all put on coal storage, and then these power plants which were completed were told, now you have to go out into the global market and buy your own coal. So their whole financial position changed. All the banks which had lent to them, and the banks which lent were, I think 90% of the loans were from the public banks and not from the privately owned banks. So that was the single largest non-performing assets sitting on the books of the bank. If you compare oranges to oranges or lemons to lemons and all that, you will find that, other than some finessing here and there, there's not really such great difference between the banking capabilities of public sector banks and private sector banks.
And how do you see that changing today? The way you've been an insider now. How do you see these things are changing and aligning to the way the world itself is changing so fast? But
see, one thing which I see is, these changes which were brought in terms of recognition of non-performing assets on the books of the banks. Those changes were, I think, much needed changes because certain amount of discipline has come in because of that. So the very narrowly and precisely a non-performing asset is now being defined as so many days. If a loan is outstanding beyond so many days, then it automatically becomes treated as a stressed asset. And then if it another certain amount of time, if the loan repayment doesn't start within that time, it becomes categorized as an NPA. If it becomes categorized as an NPA, certain consequences follow for the borrower, and the bank has to provide for that in its that current year's accounts. That entire amount will have, or certain percentage of the amount will have to be provided, or the entire amount. Now, once those norms came, the bank's credit underwriting processes naturally would tighten up. That's the immediate consequences. They will become more careful about credit underwriting. So, which means that scrutiny, the due diligence, and all that which is being done. So, that's the good news. But the bad news is this will also mean that credit will become tougher to access. And in fact, the credit tap pipeline will start drying up. Because the
particularly MSMEs suffer more.
Exactly. So the best way
scrutiny, all the large ones are easier with that. So only they keep getting it.
There, Nanju, the problem there and the tragedy for the small borrower MSME is the evidence from across the world is that the smaller borrowers are generally more diligent, more conscious about repayment. Because for them, it's a matter of honor, it's a relationship. I know the branch manager, I'm the Lions Club member in this town. I don't want to be labeled and branded as a defaulter and whatnot. So they are very, very cautious of it. And the evidence is that the default rates usually are lower. Among delinquencies are lower, and they are not intentional, except in the case of fraud. Fraud is fraud, wherever it is big or small. Now, the consequence on a bank's balance sheet is also very interesting. If you take a 1,000, say a total loan outstanding of 1,000 crores, this 1,000 crores can be outstanding from 1,000 SMEs who have borrowed 1 crore each, or it can be from one large corporate borrower who has borrowed 1,000 crores. Now, from a purely risk mitigation perspective, it is far more sensible to have 1,000 loans to 1,000 MSMEs rather than 1,000 crore loan to a large corporate, even if it is a blue chip AAA, because you don't know what can happen tomorrow.
No, but this is where it is skewed, right? Because good majority of MSMEs, like you just previously mentioned, right? The NPAs are lowest among them.
Yeah.
So it is not logical. The argument is not logical.
No. So the reason is not that. The reason is it is much more trouble for a bank to do the due diligence for 1,000 cases. That's why. So
that's
today,
true. But that is the core purpose of its existence also.
See, actually, if you look at it, Nanju, that is one of the logic which was given for bank nationalization was that the bank credit is not reaching that section of the economy which needs it, which is the informal, non-formal, and small-scale sector and self-employed sector, etc., who most badly need credit, who do not have a balance sheet, who have no asset base, who live on hand-to-mouth from profit. Today's P&L to tomorrow's P&L, their whole family exists. So since they don't have a balance sheet, they have nothing to show to a banking institution. It is to help such institutions that these people who argue in favor of bank nationalization or for liberalization of credit policies, etc. And the extreme case is the MFIs. If you take the microfinance institutions and you have these self-help groups, and Muhammad Yunus is, what he did was actually he opened people's eyes to what really that fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, as Prahlad said. There's a huge fortune. There are millions and hundreds of millions of borrowers who are waiting to borrow 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 rupees each. I'll give you an example. For instance, Federal Bank has been doing a pilot working with MFIs in Tamil Nadu and I think in one other state, Maharashtra, I think. But I know of the case in Tamil Nadu because I went to those villages. And working through as an intermediary is an MFI. And they have been onboarding small borrowers who are going to borrow 10,000 rupees, 20,000 rupees, etc. In the first year of operation, the total loan book is 1,000 crores. And probably in the next 2 years, that can reach 10,000 crores. So the scalability of this is so enormous because of the enormous hunger, the demand for credit from this sector, which today, till today, there was no means of reaching them. Today, now, the good news is thanks to technology, thanks to artificial intelligence, thanks to handheld devices which are able to operate powerful apps which are running on on a backbone of very powerful AI tools, other tools, etc. They are able to get with simple just with a thumb impression, etc. on that device, they are able to get the person's almost anything short of the horoscope of the guy. They are able to get a line of sight right into that person's credit history, everything. So I saw the onboarding process of a member of a joint liability group in a village in Chingalpet. The 8 people were onboarded in 10 minutes. Each person in 1.5 minutes, they were able to get them onboarded just by this, this
Aadhaar integration has facilitated.
And the Aadhaar and everything was there. That was the first part. Second part was because of the automation and these powerful apps which are used, they were able to also get the credit history of the person. That is, how many loans has this person taken from some other MFI? What is the repayment record there? All that is coming up on the dashboard. So now that this is cutting short the labor of doing this due diligence into a borrower who's only going to borrow 10,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees, which previously was impossible to do because the cost was too high, now is made possible.
See, I wanted to ask you, what changes do you want to see in the system in banking? And what is it that you don't want to see changing as well?
Okay. All right. So let me just say the changes which I want to see. One of the changes I don't want to see is Indian banks should not become like banks in the West. They should not become organizations which seek all kinds of ways to increase their profit by making people borrow more. This whole thing should not be by bringing in a borrowing culture. See, for example, subprime mortgages. What happened there? Apart from the people who genuinely needed a house, they went and got people saying, you take a loan from us. Interest rate is almost zero anyway. It's very, very low. So why don't you take a loan from us and you can, you can buy your own house. Now, they didn't look at how is this guy going to repay this. So that very important part of the of this credit underwriting transaction was completely overlooked. They just wanted to sanction the maximum number of loans. And one of the reasons which led to this bad behavior, everybody knows, is because the larger banks have this arrogance that they will be finally bailed out by the treasury. At the end of the day, because they're too big to fail, the treasury secretary will come and bail them out, and with public money. So my point is, I think our banks should not be like the Western banks and should not think of ingenious ways of increasing their profit by making, say, if my credit card spend is 100 rupees, the bank should not create a task force how to make me spend 1,000 rupees. Because if I don't need to spend 1,000 rupees, why should they make me, today credit card debt in the United States is household debt is about 7 trillion. Student debt is about 1.5 trillion. Credit card debt is 1.5 trillion. Now, when you look at this, how is this sustainable? So, I'm worried that is that the road down which we are going? In which case, are we going to make Indian households indebted? Today, they don't have too much debt. Are we going to leave Indian households also very heavily in debt? Already, many banks are finding that the student loans taken in India, students are not able to repay many of the loans because they've taken very heavy loans like 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs loans for completing B.Pharm courses and nursing courses, etc. And they have not landed the kind of jobs which they were hoping to get in overseas countries to repay these loans. So the first thing which I hope we don't see is our bank should not become like US banks and become profit maximizing organizations. I'm not saying they have to be social service organizations, but they should be, this should be moderated to some extent, which is why I am not just ambivalent. I am very much a votary and in favor of publicly owned banks for that reason. Of course, accountability, responsibility and all should be managed, should be ensured by good governance and by clarity of policies, etc. That's first. The second thing is public sector banks in the country, which still 70% of banking assets are in the public sector banks. So the public sector banks should be freed from all kinds of interference and supervision by the Ministry of Finance and all that. And the oversight, the supervisory oversight by Reserve Bank is more than enough. Government of India as owner should step back, should appoint capable boards filled with independent directors and not just government nominees, should invite, should get people who are qualified and in the registered as independent directors and should get them onto the board so that they become better managed. And the third is what I mentioned. Banking sector should not grow by promoting indebtedness among households by making people borrow more than what they need. That is, that should not be done. So these are the things which some of the things which I would like to see. What I would like to see also is today the Indian banking system is, in my opinion, one of the best in the world. If you see in terms of the quality of supervision and the quality and the improved levels of compliance which have been happening, especially since the pandemic. If you see the asset quality of the Indian banking system compared to the Western banking system, I think the Indian banking system has got a lot to be proud about. And a lot of the credit has to be given to the Reserve Bank of India and the managements of the larger private and publicly owned banks. So strengthen supervision and regulatory oversight. Then the other thing is, I think we should bring exemplary punishment for erring banks, especially private sector banks, and they should be allowed to fail. They should not be bailed out. In my opinion, both should be punished. The investors in those banks, that is the shareholders of those banks, the managements of the banks should be punished. They should not be bailed out for bad behavior in the name of protecting some depositors. So that depositor interest should be protected by appropriate deposit insurance schemes, etc., which already exist and which at least take care of the small depositors. The larger depositors will just have to take the hit. I'm afraid that is unavoidable. And I would say, my most important on my wish list is promote small local banks. Do not encourage the consolidation
you mean
of
the
banks
cooperative banks
into a handful of giants. Instead of that, small local regional banks is the way to go, in my opinion, because that will ensure much better credit underwriting quality because they know the people, they know the local problems. Otherwise, some computer or algorithm sitting in Bombay will be trying to figure out. Sorry?
No, you're referring to cooperative banks?
I think we need, and we already have, actually in Kerala, one of the strongest parts of Kerala's economy is the primary service cooperative banks, of which there are 1,600. On an average, their deposits range from 50 crores to 100 crores. And they attract on their boards, with some exceptions where you find some crooked people getting onto the board. This is done by election by the shareholders, and they are because their money is there in the bank, they're very particular that capable people are put. In fact, the board of directors of many of the primary service cooperative banks has the best people in each local community are present on the boards. Most capable people, most outspoken people, etc. So I think that's what happens when democracy really becomes grassroots democracy. What happens is accountability and responsibility.
Unfortunately, you see a practice developing where a lot of cooperative banks are expanding their scope and even looking at merging and going towards scheduled bank, and which is also happening. You probably observed that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Nanju, why that is happening is because of political capture. What happens is powerful political parties and powerful political personages, they are able to influence some people in the director boards and all that, and they are able to get them to to deflect their attention away from their primary role, which is to look after the interests of their members. They are not supposed to go out and do all this other kind of business. They are supposed to just lend to their members,
But the systems which are supposed to observe them are facilitating them. So how do you contain that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, see, so that is part of the political culture. That is unfortunately, where the political leadership and political culture is of a kind of have more resemblance to mafia and gangsterism and all that kind of strong arm kind of fellows. And sometimes there are some families which tend to dominate and all that. That leads to bad things. So one thing, Nanju, in everything, whether it is business, whether it is the cooperative sector, whether it is grassroots democracy, finally everything comes down to genuine democracy is the only protection, the only cure. There is no other way to ensure the people's interest other than having genuine grassroots local level democracy. And if that happens, we are okay. We are going to be okay. People will find a way. People will figure a way. Every time there is a weakening of local thing and one strong arm guy starts asserting himself or herself and they bring their family, etc. into this, then I'm afraid the local community has only itself to blame if it allows such people to come into such positions, because later on they will completely subvert the system and make it work for their own purposes and not for the community.
I just wanted to maybe do a quick fire kind of a thing. In terms of what kind of most difficult decisions, what were the most difficult decisions you had to make across, you had different careers from public administration to entrepreneur to independent director to the chairman of the bank. So where do you think you had to make the most difficult decision?
See, there were two kinds of decisions. One is operational decisions, which depend on, say, knowledge of the subject. It is a function of your knowledge of the facts and the circumstances and your experience, etc. I found very early on that it was much more sensible when in doubt to ask. So I used to, even as a sub-collector, when I was a subdivisional magistrate, we had to take court. We have to we try cases as subdivisional magistrates. We have to try cases. So I had no hesitation in ordering a recess and asking the lawyer if he cited some section of the Evidence Act or something which I was not familiar with. I'll ask him to give me that reference so that I can read it then and there. And I'll ask him to also give me a case reference so that I can read that up. And then I will, order a recess for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, enough time. I was never ashamed to do that because I thought it's more important to get it right rather than to show that I know something when I didn't really know it. So this trait has stood me in good stead in many parts of life where I haven't had no hesitation in admitting when I didn't know something. And I'll ask the people who know that. So that's the first thing. Sorry. But the more tricky question where in terms of what to do were the ethical questions. So like when I was running a business, we had to face a thing about if you want to get this particular order from one state government in some part of India, it doesn't matter where. My sales manager, they told me very clearly that some officials and some politicians are expecting some money. If we give that money, it's done. The deal is done. So we sat and we didn't dismiss it out of hand and all because we were struggling company in the early days. So I remember with our 2-3 close in our team, we had a discussion. And what I'm proud about is, I want to confess, I wasn't very clear in my mind, should we do it? I was thinking survival, no? Survival, if when you're facing death, you should take all kinds of, you should be prepared to take any decision. So I was already rationalizing it in my head. But the younger members in my team said, so we shouldn't do it. So I was then crystal clear in my mind after that. I was wavering. And the younger guys in the team tell me, they don't know what I'm thinking. They're thinking that they were probably thinking MD does not want to do it because he's a very honest and straightforward guy and all that. And so let's make it easier for him by saying that we support that. That's probably why they said it. But for me, I was actually wavering. And these guys then made it easy for me by saying that, sir, let's not do this. And in fact, I'll give you another example. So one of our big customers was this hospital, JIPMER at Pondicherry, which is a central government institution, a very prestigious medical college. And we had got the order in the previous 2 years. So that year, when the tender notification came, they had, along with the usual tender conditions, there was one more condition, which was the solvency certificate will also have to be produced, along with the no conviction certificates and this and that and whatnot. So our fellows made inquiries as to where do you get the solvency certificate from? And they were told this is from the taluk office, local taluk office. You have to get it from the revenue department. So they went to the taluk office and met some guy there and said, can you give us this certificate? So that guy said, what do you want it for? So he said, we are participating in a tender, in a big tender. It's very important tender for us. So that guy said, the fee will be 20,000 rupees for that. So this chap said, no, sir, but I looked in the notification. It's only 50 rupees or something for applying for this thing. That's the fee. If you want the certificate. So this chap, this young chap, he replied that, sir, we don't have any provision to pay these kind of fees. So then that that official in taluk office said, oh, in which case we have to write to 1,000 village offices in Kerala to find out whether there is any demand against your company. And when their reply comes, we may ask for a clarification, and then we'll have to write another 1,000 letters to all of them. And so then this young chap said, sir, but by the time all that happens, the tender we have to submit next week. We have only 10 days to go. He said, I'm sorry, we have to do this. This is the only way to do it. So obviously that man was saying, so you know what? So this young chap, he said, all right, I'll think about it. And he went back. Now, after coming back to the office, he didn't come and tell me. I don't know what I would have told him if he had come and told me what to do. But what he did next was what was very interesting and makes me proud. He gets onto the night bus from Trivandrum to Pondicherry. And he goes to Pondicherry. It's an overnight bus. Next morning, he goes and freshens up and then goes and calls on the director of PGI Chandigarh, of JIPMER, Pondicherry. And that man let him, and he saw the visiting card and let him in because he knew our company. So the director said, yes, what can I do for you? So he said, sir, this year's tender, we are planning to participate. He said, yes, I certainly hope you will because you have been good suppliers to us last 2 years. He said, this year, sir, there is a problem that they have added your office, that is the JIPMER office, have added a condition of solvency certificate. We won't be able to get that certificate. So the director asked, why is that? That's a public certificate. He said, yes, sir, the taluk office are asking for a bribe and our company will not pay bribes. So the director said, oh, is that so? Then he calls the office superintendent and says, why did we add this clause? So then the superintendent explained that the auditor had said something. So he said, is there any provision under which I can exempt a company from this clause? He said, yes, sir, there is a provision under which, based on previous track record, you can exempt. And he said, yes, sir. So he passed an order exempting our company from this thing. This chap quietly came back, never told me this. We participated in the tender, we got the tender. Now, he didn't pay the bribe. So my point here, I always use this anecdote and many other anecdotes like this to say, when people say, my majboor tha, I have to pay, otherwise I lose business, that's because probably we are not really thinking of, are there other ways to solve the problem? And what makes me very proud is many of these cases like this, so the value system of the company had become sufficiently strong. That's the way I look at it. For this young chap to think, see, I know my company is not going to pay
not to escalate, but act himself.
Exactly. So, I mean, it is phenomenal. So things like that. And otherwise, I feel operationally, I was always able to solve the decisions. The really vexing and tough decisions were those which involved ethical issues.
Are there things that you feel that you failed in your life at any point in time? Is there something that you regard as that was a point of failure for you?
Failure?
Yeah.
Many. In fact, sometimes when people ask me, when I look back on life, what is the takeaway from my experiences? So I tell them, the takeaway is Murphy was right. Murphy's law, which says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. In my case, anything that could go wrong did go wrong. So I can write a book about all the things that went wrong.
But is there one that kind of you hold it very high up in the list?
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to think of, when I say that important one, that important life-changing, yeah. I can't think of anything like that. But many big mistakes I've made, that's a fact. And some of which turned out, in fact, to not be as harmful and actually helped define us as an organization, helped clarify the role to us, though it made life much more difficult for us. So there were some times when I had to literally say, when I was, threatened with certain consequences unless I acted in a particular way, and I refused to act. I seriously weighed it. See, because if only I was going to pay the consequences, that's one way, one level at which I could do. But then by the time my organization consisted of 300, 400 people, and if something happened to that organization, the livelihoods of 400 people are going to be affected. So I had to really, it was not an easy call to take, to say, no, I'm not going to do that, which would have been easier if only I paid a price. But what about these 400 people? So those were times when I really spent sleepless nights. Like, for example, on another occasion, one of the times I'll tell you, one night I get a call at about 1 a.m. in the morning from one of my sales area managers in one part of Bihar. And this was many years ago, about 2 years after I started production. That guy said that he is at a small town in the public hospital in that small town, and 2 women have died in the town after a blood transfusion. And the hospital is blaming the blood bag system which was used, which was made by us. The blood bags. They said that the blood bags were contaminated, and that's why the patients died. So my heart stopped beating. 1 a.m. in the morning. So I told him, stay by the phone. There were no mobile phones and all those days. So he was standing by some phone. So I told him I'll call back. And immediately I called one great lady called Dr. Zareen Barucha. Dr. Zareen Barucha was the chief of blood transfusion medicine at the Tata Memorial Hospital in Bombay. And she was a person I had met a few times. So I must have woken her up from deep slumber. But I told her that so and so. She said, yes, Balagopal, what is the problem? So I said, ma'am, I'm sorry, this is the problem. This is what has happened. So could it be something connected with the blood bag, with the device, or I just wanted your expert opinion. She was the most knowledgeable person in the field in the country. So she asked me a few questions. And when she heard all the symptoms of the women who had died before they died, she says, no, that is a clear example of a very severe shock to the system. And that can happen only by wrong blood group being given. It cannot happen due to a contaminated device or anything, because that is a much slower kind of reaction. I started breathing again only then. Then I thanked her, and then I called my guy back there and said, go back to that hospital and tell the doctor, give in writing, tell the doctor that we want an investigation to be done. So he went back and, he's a rough Bihari, So he went back and told the chief medical officer, हमारा boss अभी phone किया है, ना वो health secretary से सुबह बात करेंगे. He is going to ask for a pura investigation, etc. This hospital just dropped the whole matter and they didn't follow up after that, because they knew what would happen if there was a proper investigation. So like this, I did have a few heart-stopping moments sometimes. And there my worry was not then about financial consequences. My worry was, see, I'm a first-generation businessman. I'm not coming from a business family. I'm not equipped for this kind of thing. I was the only guy in the last 3 generations on my father's side and mother's side who did not become a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something like that. I'm the only guy who went into business. So I'm not equipped for this kind of thing. So what I thought was I could live with the losses and all, but I could never live with somebody's death on my conscience. I thought I would find that very difficult to manage. So like this, there are 2-3 other emergencies which came, including a major quality complaint which came from Brazil, when later on when we investigated, and we sent our 2 good guys to Brazil at great expense. And so they went there, and they were equipped with all the information. One thing we understood right from the beginning is, if we have done our homework and if we are very well prepared, 9 out of 10 times we can prove that we were not responsible or accountable for a particular problem, and we can prove it to the satisfaction of the affected party also. And we were able to do that, and actually our business in Brazil grew after that.
Right. How do you handle a conflict in your board position, particularly from a point of where it is not the business conversation or not the compliance issues, but conflict from your personal philosophy to the other people who are sharing the responsibility with you?
Yeah. So, so in such issues, Nanju, it will never be an issue of is it legal or not legal, because if it is not legal, the people on a board will not consider. They will not even consider. So what I learned very early on is there are some issues where you can try to persuade people, and there are some issues where that the majority opinion is not with you. And in such issues, I'll back off after a point, and it is not even worth recording a dissenting note because it's not important enough. See, the problem with the dissenting note and all is, all these things are checked by the supervisor, which is the Reserve Bank. So during Reserve Bank supervisory audit, if they come up with, if they find they will think this is a very serious matter, whereas it may not have been that serious a matter. So even recording a dissenting note, it should be a very, very exceptional circumstances only it should be resorted to. So I have rarely come across situations where I felt so strongly about something that I needed to record a dissenting note.
No, but what if it's a smaller company and you work with the founders?
Yeah.
And you don't agree with the way they are doing it, but not necessarily illegal.
No, even in such matters, it's their company. So my point is, see, after a point, it's like it's like if you're a consultant and you give advice, deep down that what they are planning to do is completely going to harm them. It is going to not produce the result they are expecting. Your superior experience tells you that what you have suggested was the better course of action. Still, it's their company. You're only their consultant, or you're only their advisor or on the board. You can only say so much. So it is a difficult position to be in, because especially since I have been in the executive position where I had to take responsibility and accountability. Here, I have neither responsibility nor accountability. I'm only an advisor.
So do you stay on with the board still after that?
Unless it is, see, if I find that this becomes a practice, then I'll start, I usually am very open about these things. I'll tell them, saying that, when I find 3-4 such instances, in fact, I have resigned from some boards and an advisory board also I have resigned from, where my advice was not seen to be palatable, because I gave some very blunt advice about what I felt, whether a particular line of business. I said, I think you should just wind it up. I don't think this has got either a return on investment or return on equity or return on assets. None of this justifies you doing this business. But they decided to continue. At that point, I said, I really don't see any further use in me continuing on the board. You have other advisors. So I wish you well, and I left. Without any acrimony or anything, I left. But I think you have raised a very important point. I think as a general point, I would say that if you find yourself in a role or in a position where your advice is not being taken, and not just one-off, it is not being taken in similar circumstances on 2 or 3 occasions, then I think your self-pride and your dignity should make you realize that you're wasting your time.
All right. Well, thank you once again. In fact, I actually had more things, but I think I've again taken.
No, we can have one more session, because you gave me some more questions which were very interesting, and I've been thinking about it, and I was thinking that we'll have a discussion sometime. So if you like, we can have another session sometime.
I think we should do that. And
because I like this thing, like, what you mentioned, the advice to entrepreneurs and technologists about preparing for the future and all. So I've got something there which I can.
Oh, can we do that now? That part?
No, we can do that right away. Yeah.
Okay,
sure,
great.
Sure.
So I was just worried that I've already taken.
No, I'm okay.
Okay, perfect. So then yes, what would you want to advise to the young entrepreneurs? And also another thing I want to also bring it to your notice, that I see there are a lot of people who are becoming entrepreneurs after 40. So not necessarily young, but they do carry some amount of baggage of having worked for 20 years. I say baggage because a lot of things are in place, so they really have to unlearn a lot of things. So how would you advise to both this community? What would you say?
So, I mean, I think for any enterprise, so it doesn't matter whether they're young or whether they're whatever midlife or anytime they're coming into it. I would say going forward, first thing I would say is think local. I would advise them not to think of scale, because these are some counterintuitive ideas which I'm coming around to now, is that we are moving from an era of large centralized systems, grid-based systems which cover huge geographies and great spans of territory. We are moving from that to very local, in fact, even hyper-local kind of networks and hyper-local supply chains and thing. So the first thing is, I would say, think local. And you can scale, if you like, after that, you can scale by going from one locality to the next, and then gradually map it over that region, but grow organically. That's the first advice I would give. Second is, I would say, I have pretty strong feelings about it. So I would say, please don't think of building something from a valuation perspective, but think of building something of value. And these are two different things. Of value means it must be of value to the community, to the stakeholders, to you, to the people working in it, and to the people being served by it. If it is not of value to them, it is just imaginary. It is just I mean, to use in many cases, it will be just a con job. It will be just something which is an artificial construct. It will have no real grounding in reality. Third thing I would say is the era into which we are going. When I say compliance is non-negotiable, and right from the beginning, you must think of compliance, not because of some distant central government or some distant state government's mandate and fiat. That's not what I mean. What I mean is rules are made to protect the community and all stakeholders' interests. Therefore, you have a duty to follow it, and it is not something over which you have a choice. You have to do it. And any consult, and I'll advise my both young friends and not so young people who are setting up enterprises. If they have an advisor or consultant who says, "Oh, those things, don't worry, we'll take care of all that later," you've got the wrong advisor. Please change that advisor immediately. This is not good to take such advice. It is going to catch you later on, and it will be very expensive when it catches you. So that's that. Then another advice I would say, this is very much based on my personal experience. No matter how good you are technically, no matter how good you are in terms of marketing, and you understand the boundaries of your the domain and everything, if you don't understand finance, you shouldn't be in business. You should have some understanding of finance, some understanding. And by finance, unfortunately, what most people think of is accounting. That's what they think is finance. It has nothing to do with accounting. What I'm thinking of finance is the wherewithal to run a business. Where do you get the money from? How do you raise the money? And unfortunately, what happens is most people think they will have a friend who's the local chartered accountant. I have nothing against chartered accountants. Some of them are very brilliant fellows, but people. But the problem is, an accountant is by nature somebody who is coming in after the event. After something has happened, then you have to take the books of accounts, and you have to post everything correctly, and then you have to see that everything tallies, and then you have to present the accounts in a certain way. That's accounting. Finance is to find the wherewithal to run the business. So the kind of skills needed are completely different from the skills needed by an accountant. So if a particular entrepreneur has got, say, some people have an aversion to numbers, or they're very good at working with their hands, but they just can't wrap their heads around numbers, then find a partner who is able to understand finance. Because unless somebody in the promoter group understands finance well, you'll be always at the mercy of your accountant or your financial advisor, which is not a good thing to be in. So that, and then so I mean, that is related to the last thing, saying that if you don't have somebody in the promoter group like that, engage a good finance guy in your core team. Bring somebody into your core team, give them an ESOP or something like that, but see that they are part of the core team. So these are the sort of few
tips. I have one follow-on question on that.
Yeah.
See, there are a lot of business models that I think it's not just now, it's been there forever, but of course, technology has made it a lot more, as in to say that compliance follows business.
Compliance follows
business when there is something new. And gradually, the compliance falls in place, and thereafter, business have to start following compliance. So, in this scenario where compliance follows business, wherein we are actually operate in gray.
Yeah.
So, how would you look at that situation?
Yeah, but see, Nanju, that would be true in a place which has got, say, where either a completely new business domain has come up, which is not contemplated by, but those kind of things very rarely happen. See, that happened last in India when the IT companies came in, IT services companies came in.
No, see, we had Uber. Right? We taxi drivers needed separate permit also to drive, but technically Uber was not operating in a space. There was already a compliance in place, and Uber was actually going completely violating the space technically. So, and then the compliance had to be relooked, but because of the sheer opportunity that was lying in the space. And then, of course, e-commerce, right, which happened just in the last 10, 12 years, where that was operating completely in the gray area. And today, I actually consult in the Web3 and blockchain technology space, and there is very minimal or absolutely no law there. In fact, I've been trying to stand on top of the building, figuratively uh,
Yeah.
uh, speaking, that we unfortunate lack of compliance is actually pushing many Indian companies to go and set up shops in Dubai. I even tweeted to Ministry of Finance and all that, saying that congratulations, you've been successful in pushing perhaps few more unicorns out of India because of just not acting.
No, about this, my only comment, I mean, I have no other comment other than to say this is a situation which in my experience I have not faced. In a small way, I faced it. Let me just put it this way: it is not in the same way as you're saying. I never encountered anything like that. But when my plant was coming up, we discovered that there were no regulations in India for medical device manufacturing. There was only for pharmaceutical manufacturing. So since medical device manufacturing was not contemplated, and we were the first modern biomedical device manufacturer in India to come up. So when we went to the drugs controller, they did a typically Indian solution. Our license read, my company was called Penpal. So they said Penpal is licensed to manufacture the drug anticoagulant dextrose adenine, citrate phosphate dextrose adenine in plastic containers. Now, what is interesting was the value of the drug, which is the anticoagulant, out of my total device cost, the value of the anticoagulant was 5%. 95% of the cost was the container, which is what they call the container was the device, the plastic blood bank
technically
system.
You didn't have any license of, so to speak.
So what happened was my license was only for that. So, but that was the only way they could shoehorn my project into some existing law. Then what happened was a very interesting problem came up before us. We had then the freedom to really manufacture almost unregulated, because the anticoagulant is very easy to make. Only that room could be inspected by the drugs control. All the rest of the factory, 95% of the factory was plastics manufacturing. So what did we do? We did what something which was very counterintuitive. And again, on the advice of my technical guru, Professor Ramani, he told me, Bala, you adopt the toughest standards in the world which are existing today. Take it as a voluntarily for yourself. And the toughest standards in the world were the UK DHSS standards. So we adopted as an internal decision the UK DHSS standards, where every batch of product before it left the factory had to pass 194 tests and determinations before it left the factory. And we took this very tough thing, which was not mandated. The drugs controller was not even aware of it, and nobody insisted on it. But because we took it, in 2-3 years' time, we were making world-class products. So, as Michelangelo, I read somewhere that Michelangelo is supposed to have said, the real danger is not that you set your goals very high and fail. The real danger is that you set your goals very low and succeed.
So very true. So very apt as well. Well, that's so right. In fact, I don't know. Do we take another minute?
Yeah, we can go on.
Okay.
Better.
All right. So, how do you see the evolution of this entrepreneurial driven? Because the Startup India thing is making startup as cool. When I first became an entrepreneur, I used to have a company where I was having 25-30 people that I'm paying salary to, but my parents would still say he's doing something, because I'm not working for a big company.
Yeah.
And today I have people who friends tell me that children are entrepreneur because they're sitting and making some app in their room. Right? And they call that's being an entrepreneur. So it's very positive from that point. And also this Startup India making access to capital. There are grants available. There are convertible loans are available for business to start. So how do you see making easy access to capital, making that whole entrepreneurial thing a cool thing to do? Uh, how do you see? Because I know you are also very active in Thai in Kerala and
Yeah.
quite a few other efforts as well. So how do you see this uh, uh, making a better tomorrow for India and everywhere else?
Yeah. See, I'll just take what you said is really one of the things with which I think more of us should be spending more time thinking about, because often things are just glossed over by calling it a startup ecosystem, etc. Actually, what we are looking at is a huge societal change. Because let's take, for example, even ordinary, when it comes down to individual behavior, we expect a society to create entrepreneurs when our education system teaches them to be afraid of failure.
Correct.
So there is an immediate contradiction there. Nothing in our education system has equipped us to take risks. In fact, the education system creates a risk-averse cohort of people who come out, who are taught that even getting 5 marks lower in your transcript, if your subsequent score is 5 points lower than your previous score, you're asked for an explanation as to why is that so.
Well, one of the IIM directors told me that when I pointed it to them that in their own incubation facility, there's not a single application from a student. It's all outsiders, or there are a few alumni, of course, but not the students. And he was telling me that it's because almost all of them are on education.
Yeah, there you are. So the point here is, I think we are sort of programmed from very early, and especially our most impressionable years, which are, say, before the age of 10, that's the maximum time when inputs are just going in we are absorbing inputs from the whole world around us. At that time, we are taught to be risk averse. We are, in fact, the kid who stands up in class to say something, including the teacher and the rest of the class, will ridicule that kid for asking a foolish question, for asking a stupid question. Whereas actually the kid should be congratulated for asking a question which many may have wanted to ask and they were hesitant to ask. So, for me, it's a telltale sign. Somebody who puts up his or her hand and is ready with some questions and all tells me a lot about that person and tells me a lot about the people around them when you watch the body language. So what I'm saying is, I think we are talking about actually a major societal change. And that's why we have to be a little patient, and we have to understand, we have to take a systems approach to entrepreneur development. We cannot just have an incubator and then put some incentives there and expect a whole line of queue to form outside, because where is the supply going to come from? The supply has to come from, and they are not really trained for that. So I think we have to start working on curriculum itself. And so there has to be a parallel movement. Not only must we work at the end where the tap is opening and from where the entrepreneurs are supposed to come out. There's no point working only at that level. We have to go behind into the plumbing and see where all should we intervene. And in my opinion, I have seen, I met an amazing person called, a friend of Vinny's and mine, called Lisa Hedloff. Lisa is an American, English American, who has just fallen in love with India. And her passion is to make a difference to school education, and particularly the girl child. And she has climbed mountains literally in India. When you consider what she has accomplished with absolutely no resources other than a boundless optimism and belief in that good programs will find support. She passionately believes that with almost religious intensity. At one time, her curriculum and her books were being followed by some 10,000 schools in Bihar. In Hindi, she had got these books, and the content of those books were all about entrepreneurship, were all about children and stories of people in villages who went and started a small business out of something. making old clothes, making some business out of that. Same thing. How Gauri made this thing, how Vikram did that, how Lakshman created a small piggery, those kind of things. So what I'm saying is, I think we have to start from that end. So we must, of course, there will be some low-hanging fruit which we can get, but we must, I think the more meaningful exercise will be the medium-term and long-term programs, where I don't see much being done today. Everybody is talking at where the tap end, the faucet end, they are talking about incubators and accelerators and, all kinds of things, which is good. All that is necessary. But if what is coming out is still only a trickle, then we have to go back upstream and see what is the problem there. And there the problem is that we are teaching them we're teaching the kids all the wrong things. So we'll have to work on not only on the curriculum, we'll have to work on the teachers. We'll have to tell them that the learning experience in a classroom kids should be made to ask questions. That's how the class should go, and not unidirectional flow of things like that. So I think, and I basically, like I think it was Ha-Joon Chang in one of his lectures, he says, see, like many misunderstandings of developing countries, one of the things which Western experts say about developing countries is that they lack entrepreneurship. He said, actually, nothing could be further from the truth than that. He said, you go to any poor country and everywhere you'll find queues, because there's a shortage. In poor countries, there's usually a shortage for everything. So there are queues. There are people who will come and tell you, if you are really in a hurry, I've got 3 of my people standing in the queue. So if you give me 10 rupees, you can go and stand in that guy's position. Now, isn't that entrepreneurship? He has found a need, he has found a pain point, he has found a solution for that, and it's very low cost, very low investment, and he's making money. So Ha-Joon Chang says, how on earth can you say that there is no entrepreneurship? What is lacking here is different. What is lacking here is opportunity, is capital, is credit. You give these people some credit and you'll see them flying. So I think in terms of entrepreneurship, this is what we really need. We should start with our schools, because on the business side, the numbers are growing year on year. It doesn't need any help from us. But what we need to do is ensure that the supply keeps growing. And otherwise, we'll run up against a severe supply constraint at some point of time.
Well, that's interesting. But yeah, I guess then we'll have to go on continuing talking about NEP and things. But sure thing. Thank you so much, Bala. One more thing I just had. Are there people, of course, you actually took even Ha-Joon Chang as well. You mentioned many names all through our conversations, even in the first part. So are there people that you attribute to for the person that you are today? And who would they be?
So let me just tell you, I would list. I mean, there are many people. I am very open about the fact that whenever I hear this phrase, he is a self-made man, I can't understand that phrase, because I think it's a completely imaginary concept. There is no such thing as a self-made man, in my opinion, or woman. Everybody is a result of a lot of influences, whether we acknowledge it or not. So let me start by, it's not in any order, but let me start with the 3 or 4 people who have made, who I know have made a very crucial contribution to making me who I am today. The first, the most important, and the one whom you know very well is Vinita. I am a risk taker, I am all that, but I have certain sides to me which are, I know, not very good in terms of for success in business and entrepreneurship. One of those things is persistence, that going back despite getting any number of no's and refusals. Now, for example, when after I sold my company and got out, and Winnie she made me write the book, because she said, you tell all these stories after a couple of glasses of rum and you're sitting with your friends. You say such marvelous stories. They enjoyed. Many of them tell me, why don't you tell Bala to write? Why don't you? I'll say, yeah, I'll write. And I kept forgetting. But Winnie being Winnie, one day she said, you are going to write now. Okay, you're going to write this, and this month you shall finish 1 chapter or 2 chapters and show it to me. So anyway, I sat down and I finished that book. Then I took it to half a dozen publishers, and each time I got a nice, polite, well-worded reply saying it's a very nice book and all that, but it doesn't fit in with our publishing whatever, and so we wish you well. So I got so many rejections, and then I said, okay, that's it. Anyway, I enjoyed writing it. That's enough. But Winnie's made of sterner stuff and said, no, nothing of the sort. We are going to go back. We're going to find out. Let's go talk to the editor. Let's go do this. To cut a long story short, HarperCollins finally published the book, and published my next book also. So the first thing is where Winnie made me believe in myself, because I realized many times in my life before I met her, there are many things, many times I used to walk away shrugging, saying, oh, if they're okay, maybe this is not good enough, and I'll just walk off. I never questioned that maybe I should talk to somebody else. Maybe I should this thing, that not let go, not give up like that, And she made me go back, and then I discovered so I used to think to myself that if I had met her earlier in my life, how much more in many ways. I have no regret about that, but I'm glad. I'm thankful that we met when we did. But so that is the first thing. Second thing is, in all my life, having been the eldest son, and with an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, which many eldest sons have, I felt it was my duty to be there for others. And I never noticed the fact that often there was probably nobody there for me. But when Winnie after she came into my life, I always felt there was somebody in my corner. And that was, at the end of the day, a very bad day, very bad thing. We are facing some real serious problem. I could go back and talk to her, And then, and she's not going to say yes, and just sympathize with me and all. She's quite blunt sometimes when she says, yes, you said that was very stupid of you to say that. You shouldn't have said that. Now let's see how we can figure it out. So that's the second thing. She's always there for me. And third thing is this thing that, related to the first thing, this belief in myself, is that now I believe and life has proved that I can almost do anything I want to. That kind of, it's not a cockiness or an arrogance, that it's just that I must apply myself, and then there is probably no limit to what we can. And I suspect this is true for everybody, but we need somebody to. So this first, most important just 1 sec, Nanju. Yeah, most important person in terms of decisive impact is Winnie. Second is my father. My father was a very ordinary person. He was a planter. He was initially, his part of his life, he was in tea, and then the second half of his life, he was in rubber. And in fact, all his life, he was a planter working for an English plantation company. But he was from a very affluent family. His father, my grandfather, was a real great man. He was the first fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons from Glasgow, from Travancore. He was a Surgeon General of Travancore and everything. But my father was nothing like him. He was just an ordinary guy. And he went to Christian College, Madras, and then after that he came back and joined this plantation company. But from him, I learned the values just by him being who he is. He never gave lectures, he never gave talks. He was always a very withdrawn. In fact, the best way to describe him, Nanju, is he was Atticus Finch in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. If you want a picture of the kind of guy my father was, he was Atticus Finch. Of course, he was not as handsome as Gregory Peck, though, who acted as Atticus Finch in the movie. But he was a handsome man, my father. But he was, that's not what I meant. He was a very inconspicuous kind of guy who didn't want to be noticed, never wanted to be pushed forward, though he was professionally very highly respected guy. So he had this integrity, honesty, and simplicity. These virtues, amazing qualities in people, which I have striven all my life to try to live up to. So he was the second person. And third person is my boss when I was in government service. The most amazing boss ever I worked under was he was a communist politician. His name was E. Chandrasekhar Nair. And he was the CPI minister for food and civil supplies when I worked under him. And that my third book is actually dedicated to him. I rushed it through the press because I wanted to. Unfortunately, he died just before I published the book. Chandrasekhar Nair was an outstanding man, a gold medalist in law, a gold medalist in mathematics, a brilliant lawyer, young lawyer who gave up a promising career to join the Communist Party and become a full-time politician. And then he was a banker. He became president of the District Cooperative Bank, president of the State Cooperative Bank, president of the National Cooperative Union, president of the Federation of International Cooperative Banks. And he was an advisor on rural credit and cooperatives to the Reserve Bank of India governor when I.G. Patel was the governor. So he was an amazing man. And I worked under him and he taught me whatever I know about business, I learned by just watching him. Whatever I learned about finance, and I learned by just watching him. He transformed the public distribution system in Kerala, which was just a ration card-based allocation system, which it is in every other state. In Kerala, he transformed it into a market intervention tool to control the price level, by creating this organization called Supply Co, making them hold inventories. And see, if you look at the difference between the inventory of Food Corporation of India and the inventory of Supply Co, the Food Corporation of India is a static entity, which is just a balance sheet entry. Whereas in the case of Supply Co, it was a dynamic tool, an instrument which the minister used to control the price level in the market, especially during festival times and peak demand times and all that. So he influenced my thinking in terms of he told how you can, by just simple thinking, by clear thinking, we can come up with solutions to what appear to be very complex problems. So he was the other person. And finally, it was another person. There are many more. But another person is Professor A.V. Ramani, the man with whom I had my epiphany, who influenced me in terms of this deep conviction that the knowledge is boundless, and science and widening our knowledge of the world around us will equip us in many, many unexpected ways to solve problems around us, make life easier for, people from vulnerable sections and all that. So going for a walk with Ramani just down the street was an education, because you learn something along the way. He'll point out something about the electric wires, and he will tell me something about the static charge between the wires, something which he will link to something in our lives. So Ramani was a guy who it created in me a sense of wonder, about, and even today I have this childlike thing about when I read Dawkins, or when I read Hitchens, or when I read Carl Sagan or somebody like that. And that, which is why my favorite recreation, apart from watching old cricket matches and soccer matches which feature Messi, my next the thing and of course the great basketball matches of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. The other thing which I really like are watching this Discovery Channel and things like this David Attenborough and all that kind of stuff. I just love it, and a lot of it was for me sort of ignited. That interest was ignited by Ramani. So these are 3 or 4 of the people who have been influences on my life, made me who I am.
Oh, wonderful. I think the true sense of a person also comes from the person's ability to recognize and express gratitude, which is so Thank you so much. I feel I'm very lucky that I know you.
Okay.
Wonderful. Right. Bala, thank you so much. And to the audience and listeners, I think you've just been part of such an amazing journey. And I hope you just enjoyed it as much as I did. And I think I'll probably also listen to this one more time because there are so many different things we talked about it, and I'm sure you will do it. And do share it across to your friends and your network that who appreciate it, whether they are entrepreneurs or they want to be entrepreneurs, or uh, to all the curious people, because this is the kind of conversation that everybody should listen to. So thank you. And if you have not followed Future Fast yet, do it soon. And the links to the books authored by Balagopal Chandrasekhar are all below this podcast. So please click, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it, because one nice thing, if you start following him on LinkedIn, you will realize that each of the posts, you just start reading, you will only finish it then and there. You will not postpone it, because he has that way of writing which makes it so easy reading. So enjoy it. And Pala, thank you once again. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you, Ranju.